There's a cage most people never see. Not made of iron or stone, but something far more subtle. It has no bars, no locks, no visible walls, yet it holds millions in place, year after year. While they wonder why nothing changes, they work harder, they try new strategies, they read the books and follow the advice. But the numbers stay the same. The pressure remains. The feeling of being stuck becomes so familiar it starts to feel like truth. This is not about laziness. It's not about lack of effort or intelligence. It's something deeper, something woven into the fabric of how you think, how you see yourself, how you respond to the world. It operates below conscious awareness, running quietly in the background like code in a machine. And because you cannot see it, you cannot question it. You simply live inside it, believing this is just how things are. The trap is psychological. It lives in your mind, but it shapes your entire financial reality. It determines what you attempt and what you avoid. It filters every opportunity through a lens you didn't choose but inherited. And most dangerously, it feels like you. It feels like your personality, your nature, your limitations. But it's not. It's just a pattern that learned to survive by pretending to be truth. Most people spend their entire lives inside this trap without ever knowing it exists. They attribute their financial struggles to external factors, to bad luck, to the economy, to their circumstances. And while these things matter, they're not the primary force keeping people stuck. The primary force is internal. It's the invisible architecture of thought and feeling that determines how you respond to everything external. Imagine walking through a forest at night, following a path you've walked 1,000 times before. You know every turn, every route, every shadow. It feels safe because it's familiar, but what you don't realize is that the path curves back on itself. You're not moving forward, you're walking in circles. The forest itself hasn't trapped you. Your habit of following the known path has. This is what happens inside the mind. You develop patterns of thinking, feeling, and acting that feel natural, automatic, even protective. When money gets tight, you feel a certain way. When opportunity appears, you react a certain way. When risk presents itself, you retreat a certain way. These responses happen so quickly, so smoothly, that they seem like who you are. But they're not. They're just patterns you've repeated until they became invisible. And patterns, once established, tend to reinforce themselves. Each time you follow the same mental path, it deepens. The groove becomes a track. The track becomes a trench. Eventually, you're not choosing the path anymore. The path is choosing you. Your thoughts become predictable. Your reactions become automatic. And your outcomes become inevitable. Not because the world decided, but because you're running the same program over and over, expecting a different result. The mind doesn't recognize this as a problem. To the mind, consistency is safety, predictability is survival. Even if the pattern produces suffering, at least it's known suffering. At least you understand it. And so the loop continues, day after day, year after year, until the cage becomes so familiar you forget there was ever anything outside of it. Understanding this requires you to step back and look at your life not as a series of random events, but as a coherent pattern. When you examine your financial history, you'll likely notice themes. The same types of problems appearing in different forms. The same feelings arising in different situations. The same decisions being made with different details. This is not coincidence. This is the pattern expressing itself, creating consistency even when that consistency is painful. The trap is not built of circumstances. It's built of interpretation. Two people can face the same financial reality and see completely different things. One sees limitation, the other sees material to work with. One sees proof that nothing will change. The other sees information about what to adjust. The difference is not in the facts. It's in the lens through which the facts are filtered. Your lens was formed over years, shaped by experience, emotion, and the beliefs of those around you. Some part of you learned that money is scarce, or dangerous, or something other people have. Some part of you concluded that you're not the type who succeeds financially, or that trying too hard leads to disappointment, or that stability is safer than growth. These conclusions felt reasonable at the time, They may have even protected you from pain or failure, but now they quietly govern your choices. They determine what you attempt and what you avoid. They shape how you interpret success and failure, and because they operate automatically, you don't recognize them as interpretations. You experience them as reality. When someone suggests a new approach, your mind immediately scans for reasons it won't work. When an opportunity requires risk, your body tenses before your conscious mind even evaluates the situation. When growth demands change, something inside you whispers that change is dangerous, that what you have is enough, that wanting more is somehow greedy or foolish. This is the lens at work, not analyzing reality, but filtering it through old conclusions that were never meant to be permanent. And the cruelest part is that the lens proves itself right. If you believe you can't, you won't try fully. If you don't try fully, you won't succeed. And when you don't succeed, the belief is confirmed. The loop tightens. The cage becomes more real. The lens also determines what you notice and what you ignore. If you believe opportunities are rare, you'll filter out most of the opportunities that appear, dismissing them as too risky, too uncertain, not right for someone like you. If you believe money comes from hard work alone, you'll ignore the role of strategy, timing, relationships, and leverage. Your attention will be captured by evidence that confirms what you already believe, while contradictory evidence slides past unnoticed. This selective attention creates a feedback loop. The world you experience is not the world as it is, but the world as your lens allows you to see it. And because your experience confirms your beliefs, you never question the lens itself. You just assume this is reality, and you adapt your behavior accordingly, which produces results that further confirm the original belief. The mind craves consistency. It wants your behavior to match your identity, your outcomes to confirm your beliefs. This is not conscious. It's a deep, subconscious drive to maintain coherence. If you believe somewhere beneath the surface that you're not someone who builds wealth, your mind will subtly steer you away from actions that contradict that belief. Not through sabotage, through comfort. It will make staying small feel safer than expanding. It will make the familiar struggle feel more honest than unfamiliar success. It will whisper that risk is reckless, that ambition is arrogance, that wanting more is somehow wrong. And you'll believe it because it sounds like your own voice. But it's not your voice. It's the voice of the pattern, defending itself. This is why effort alone doesn't break the cycle. You can work incredibly hard within the same mental framework and still produce the same results. The framework determines the outcome. And if the framework is designed to keep you safe rather than help you grow, all your effort will be poured into maintaining the cage. You'll work long hours but avoid the conversation that could change everything. You'll save carefully but never invest in the opportunity that requires courage. You'll plan meticulously but never execute on the plan that demands you become someone new. The pattern doesn't want you to fail. It wants you to stay consistent. And if your identity is built on struggle, on being the person who works hard but never quite breaks through, then breakthrough becomes a threat. Success becomes the enemy, not because you don't want it, but because it would require you to abandon the story you've been telling yourself about who you are. This is one of the most difficult truths to accept, that you might be unconsciously invested in your own limitation, that some part of you finds safety in struggle, finds identity in being the underdog, finds meaning in the fight itself rather than the victory. This doesn't make you weak or broken, it makes you human. The mind constructs identity from whatever material is available, and sometimes that material includes limitation. But recognizing this is the first step toward freedom, because once you see that your identity is not fixed, that it's just a story you've been telling, you can begin to tell a different story, not through affirmations or positive thinking, but through action, through choosing, again and again, to behave in ways that contradict the old identity and support a new one. Fear plays a role, but not the way most people think. It's not the fear of failure that traps you. It's the fear of losing what little stability you have. Even if that stability is uncomfortable, it's known. And the known, no matter how limiting, feels safer than the unknown. So you stay. You endure the pressure, the frustration, the quiet disappointment. because at least you understand it. But there's another layer beneath this. It's the fear of discovering that you could have changed things long ago, that the limitations were never as solid as they seemed, that you were capable all along, but something inside you kept saying no. This kind of realization is uncomfortable. It disrupts the story you've told yourself about why things are the way they are, and so the mind resists it. It builds justifications, defends the old patterns, clings to explanations that preserve the narrative. This is the trap at its most invisible. It doesn't feel like a trap. It feels like self-protection. It feels like wisdom. It feels like you're being realistic, practical, responsible. But underneath, it's just fear disguised as reason. Fear that if you tried and failed, you'd have to face something painful about yourself. Fear that if you succeeded, you'd have to admit you wasted years playing small. Fear that change itself, regardless of outcome, would destabilize the fragile sense of control you've built. And so you choose the cage, not consciously, not deliberately, but through 1,000 small decisions that feel like non-decisions. Through avoiding the conversation, delaying the action, dismissing the idea before it fully forms, through staying busy with tasks that don't threaten your identity, while the real opportunities pass by unnoticed. Fear also manifests as a physical sensation, a tightness in the chest, a knot in the stomach, a tension in the shoulders. And because these sensations are uncomfortable, the mind learns to avoid whatever triggers them. If thinking about a new business venture creates anxiety, you'll stop thinking about it. If considering a career change makes you feel uncertain, you'll dismiss it as impractical. If imagining financial success brings up feelings you can't name, you'll redirect your attention to something safer. This is how fear operates below the surface, not as a dramatic emotion, but as a subtle discomfort that steers you away from anything that threatens the status quo. And over time, you become so skilled at avoiding these feelings that you don't even notice you're doing it. The avoidance becomes automatic. The cage becomes invisible. And you spend your energy managing the discomfort of being stuck, rather than facing the discomfort of breaking free. There comes a moment, if you're fortunate, when something shifts. Not in your circumstances, but in your awareness. You begin to notice the loop. You catch yourself repeating the same thought for the 1,000th time, making the same excuse, feeling the same tightness in your chest when a new opportunity appears. And for the first time, instead of accepting it as truth, you ask a different question. What if this isn't true? What if this feeling isn't wisdom but habit? What if the voice saying you can't is not protecting you but limiting you? This is the beginning of disruption, not rebellion, not force. Just the quiet introduction of doubt into a system that has run on certainty. And doubt, applied carefully, is one of the most powerful tools you have. It loosens the grip of the pattern. It creates space between stimulus and response. It allows you to see that the path you've been walking is not the only path available. At first, this awareness is fleeting. The pattern reasserts itself quickly. The old thoughts return, the old feelings flood back, and you find yourself walking the familiar path again before you even realize you've started. This is normal. The pattern has momentum. It has years of repetition behind it. It won't dissolve the moment you notice it, but something has changed. You've seen behind the curtain. You've glimpsed the mechanism, and once you see it, even briefly, you can never fully unsee it. The next time the pattern runs, you'll recognize it a little faster. The next time the fear whispers, you'll hear it as fear rather than truth. The next time the excuse forms, you'll catch yourself mid-sentence and pause. This pause is everything. In that space between the trigger and the response, you have choice. Not unlimited choice, not easy choice, but real choice nonetheless. You can feel the pull of the old pattern and choose not to follow it. You can notice the automatic thought and let it pass without acting on it. You can experience the discomfort and move forward anyway. This is where transformation begins. Not in grand moments of revelation, but in these small pauses. These tiny gaps of awareness where you interrupt the automatic flow of thought and behavior. Each pause weakens the old neural pathway and creates the possibility of a new one. Each moment of conscious choice is a small act of rebellion against the invisible forces that have governed your life. And the more you practice this, the more natural it becomes. The pause lengthens, the space expands, and in that space, you begin to discover that you have far more agency than you realized, that the cage was always unlocked, that the limitations were always negotiable, that the story was always just a story. Once you see the trap, you cannot unsee it. This is both uncomfortable and liberating. Uncomfortable because you realize how much time you spent inside something that wasn't real. Liberating because the moment you see it, it begins to lose power. A cage you can see is no longer invisible. A pattern you can name is no longer automatic. But seeing is not enough. The pattern will try to reassert itself. It will offer comfort, familiarity, the easy path back into the known. This is not failure. This is how change works. The old structure doesn't vanish the moment you question it. It lingers. It seduces. It waits for a moment of fatigue or fear to pull you back in. The work, then, is not to fight it, but to stay aware. To notice when the loop begins again. To pause before the automatic response. To choose consciously a different thought, a different action, even if it feels strange or uncomfortable. This is how new patterns form, not through willpower, but through repetition of a new kind. You start small, not with grand gestures or dramatic changes, but with tiny redirections. When the thought arises that you're not capable, you don't argue with it. You simply acknowledge it as a thought, not a fact. When the fear appears, you don't push it away. You feel it, recognize it, and then ask what action you would take if the fear weren't in control. When the excuse forms, you let it exist, and then you act anyway. Each time you do this, you weaken the old neural pathway and strengthen a new one. Each time you choose awareness over automaticity, you reclaim a small piece of your agency. The changes are subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but they compound. And over time, what once felt impossible begins to feel merely difficult. What felt difficult begins to feel manageable. And what felt manageable begins to feel natural. This process is not linear. There will be days when the old pattern dominates completely, when you fall back into the familiar loop without even noticing until hours or days later. This is not regression. This is part of the process. The old pattern has deep roots. It won't release its hold without resistance. But each time you notice, each time you pause, each time you choose differently, you loosen those roots a little more. The key is to approach this work with patience and curiosity rather than judgment. You're not trying to punish yourself for having these patterns. You're not trying to force yourself into a new identity through sheer will. You're simply observing, questioning, and experimenting. You're treating your own mind like a scientist treats a phenomenon, with interest and openness rather than frustration or shame. Conscious movement forward doesn't mean you suddenly have all the answers. It means you're no longer trapped by the questions. You're no longer waiting for certainty before you act, or for permission before you try. You begin to see financial decisions not as tests of your worth, but as experiments with outcomes. Some work, some don't. But nothing confirms or denies your identity anymore. You are not your bank account. You are not your past mistakes. You are not the story you inherited. This shift is subtle, but it changes everything. When you stop defending an identity built on limitation, you stop unconsciously creating evidence for it. When you stop interpreting struggle as proof of your inadequacy, you stop choosing struggle as a way to stay consistent with yourself. The mind's need for coherence remains, but now it works in your favor. You begin to act like someone who solves problems, and the mind adjusts to support that. You start noticing opportunities you would have dismissed before, not because new opportunities appeared, but because you're no longer filtering everything through the lens of impossibility. You start having conversations you would have avoided, not because you're suddenly fearless, but because you recognize fear as information rather than instruction. You start taking actions that feel uncomfortable, not because discomfort disappeared, but because you understand that growth lives on the other side of comfort. The trap doesn't disappear, but you learn to see it forming. and you walk around it. You recognize the old thought patterns as they arise, and you choose not to follow them. You feel the pull of the familiar path, and you consciously step onto a different one. This is not willpower. This is awareness in action. And awareness, once cultivated, becomes its own kind of momentum. The external results follow, but they're not the point. The point is that you're no longer living at the mercy of invisible forces. You're no longer a passenger in your own financial life, wondering why the destination never changes. You've taken the wheel, and even when you don't know where you're going, even when the road is uncertain, you're finally moving. Something else begins to happen as well. As you change your relationship with money, with risk, with possibility, other people notice. Not because you're performing or pretending, but because authentic change radiates. Your energy shifts, your presence changes, and opportunities begin to appear that match your new frequency. This isn't mystical, it's practical. When you stop broadcasting limitation, people stop responding to you as limited. When you stop identifying with struggle, you stop attracting situations that require you to struggle. The universe doesn't care about your financial situation, but people do. And people respond to the signals you send, consciously and unconsciously. When those signals change, the responses change. And your financial reality, which is largely determined by your relationships and interactions with other people, changes along with it. There will be moments when you slip back, when the old feeling returns, and the familiar thought whispers that nothing has really changed. This is not evidence that you've failed. It's evidence that the old pattern still exists, waiting for a moment of vulnerability. But now you know what it is. You recognize the feeling not as truth but as echo, and echoes fade when you stop amplifying them. The difference between being trapped and being free is not the absence of the trap. It's the awareness that you can choose differently, that every moment offers a fork in the path. One direction leads back into the loop, the other leads somewhere new. You won't always choose the new path, but each time you do, you strengthen it. Each time you pause and question the automatic response, you loosen the old groove. This is not about perfection, it's about direction. And direction, over time, becomes destination. You don't need to change everything at once. You don't need to become someone completely different overnight. You just need to make one choice today that your past self wouldn't have made. One small act of awareness. One moment of questioning the automatic thought. One decision to move toward growth instead of comfort. Tomorrow, you do it again. Not perfectly, not flawlessly, just consciously. And the day after that, again. Some days you'll forget, some days the old pattern will win, but the trajectory is no longer circular. It's no longer a loop that brings you back to the same place year after year. It's a spiral, moving upward, even when it feels like you're revisiting familiar ground. Because each time you return to a challenge, you return as someone slightly different. Someone with a little more awareness. Someone with a little less attachment to the old story. Someone who sees the cage a little more clearly and believes in it a little less. Over weeks and months, these small choices accumulate. The person you're becoming is not dramatically different from the person you were. But the subtle shifts in perception, in response, in choice, create entirely different outcomes. You find yourself in conversations you wouldn't have had before, making decisions you wouldn't have made, considering possibilities you wouldn't have entertained. And each of these expands your sense of what's possible, which in turn expands what you're willing to attempt. This is how the cage dissolves, not through a single moment of breakthrough, but through a gradual expansion of your sense of agency, possibility, and identity. The walls don't shatter, they fade, and one day you realize you've been walking freely for longer than you remember being trapped. The psychological trap that keeps people financially stuck is not a character flaw. It's a mechanism, a system that formed in response to pain, fear, or confusion, and then calcified into habit. It was never meant to last forever. It was never your true nature. It was just the best solution your mind could find at the time. A way to survive when you didn't have the resources, the knowledge, or the support to do anything else. But you are not locked into the solutions of your past. The moment you see the mechanism, you gain the power to interrupt it. Not through force, not through shame, but through awareness, question, and choice. The path out is not a battle. It's a series of small redirections, each one creating a little more space, a little more freedom, a little more possibility. The trap loses its power the moment you stop believing it's not a trap. The cage dissolves the moment you realize the door was never locked. And the life you thought was impossible begins to unfold the moment you stop defending the story that said it couldn't. You don't need permission to change. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need to wait until you feel ready. You just need to see what's been invisible, question what's been automatic, and take one step in a new direction. That step might be small. It might feel insignificant, but it breaks the spell. It interrupts the loop. It proves to your nervous system that change is possible, that the old rules don't have to govern the future, that you are more than the sum of your past patterns. And once you take that first step, the second becomes easier. Not easy, but easier. And the third easier still. This is how transformation happens. Not through revelation, but through repetition. Not through one dramatic moment, but through 1,000 small choices that slowly reshape the landscape of your life. The cage that held you wasn't built in a day, and it won't dissolve in a day. But it will dissolve, thought by thought, choice by choice, moment by moment of conscious awareness. And one day, you'll look back and realize you've been walking freely for longer than you knew, that the walls you once felt pressing in around you have faded into memory, that the financial reality you once thought was fixed has shifted in ways you couldn't have imagined when you were still trapped inside the loop. Not because you became someone else, but because you remembered who you were before the cage was built. The person you're capable of becoming already exists within you, not as a distant ideal, but as a present possibility. Every limitation you've accepted as permanent is negotiable. Every pattern you've believed was your nature is actually just habit. Every cage you've lived inside was constructed by thoughts and feelings that can be examined, questioned, and ultimately released. This doesn't mean the journey will be comfortable. Growth rarely is. But there's a difference between the discomfort of expansion and the pain of constriction. The discomfort of stepping outside the cage is temporary and generative. The pain of staying inside is permanent and degenerative. One leads somewhere, the other just continues. You have a choice right now, in this moment. You can continue walking the familiar path, following the patterns that have governed your financial life up to this point, or you can pause, notice the pattern, and take one conscious step in a different direction. That's all it takes to begin. Not a complete transformation, not a perfect plan, just one conscious choice that interrupts the automatic flow, and then another, and another, until the new path becomes as familiar as the old one, but leads somewhere entirely different. Until the cage is just a memory of something that once felt real but was always made of nothing more than repeated thoughts and unquestioned beliefs. The trap is real, but it's not solid, it's not permanent, and it's not you. It's something that happened to you, something you constructed in response to circumstances that no longer exist. And what was constructed can be deconstructed. What was learned can be unlearned. What was chosen, even unconsciously, can be chosen differently. This is your moment. This is where the pattern can break. This is where the loop can open into a line moving forward, not through force or drama, but through simple awareness and the courage to question what you've always assumed was true. If this truth awakened something within you, don't stop here. Your transformation has only begun.